Hello, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. Recently, did an episode on looking back on how far tactics came during the GWOT, the Global War on Terror. Talking about everything that changed between, say, 2003 and the gear and tactics we had versus today, and how far that's come. I was thinking today about how far we've come into concealed carry. Now, I knew from personal experience that we've come a long way in concealed carry since the, let's say, mid-2000s, and even before that in the 90s. Concealed carry was a thing, but it was nowhere near as common or as permitted as it is today. I mean permitted as in culturally acceptable, and also literally permitted as in able to get a permit. Wikipedia has a page on concealed carry, and I was doing research for this episode trying to back up what I had seen in my own personal experience because, as the Bible says, by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. So I went there, and they have like a map that shows the progress of concealed carry since the 90s. Back then, only one state allowed constitutional carry. And if you don't know, it would be hard to guess which one. Vermont. Vermont was the only one that allowed permitless carry. Now many states have permitless carry. Not to mention many states back then were no concealed carry permits or shall issue instead of, or as I was, they were may issue instead of shall issue. This country's come a long way in concealed carry, both rights and commonality. And for as much as we talk about the bad and just a certain subsection of America trying to disarm us and take away our guns, and that's a real thing. I don't want to take away from that. You absolutely, I think, should be vigilant against that. And I think that shall not be infringed means exactly that. Shall not be infringed. But let us rejoice in the good things that we have. And something we have now more than we did back then is so much in the way of concealed carry. Both the freedom to exercise that right the way it should be in many states, the progress we've made in those states, and the firearms and tactics. I think to appreciate what we have now, it's important to look back from the tactical days of yore and see where we came from to appreciate more fully all that we can take advantage of today. So, a little bit, I'm not going to put in the bio like I normally do. I'm going to talk about my experience kind of with this topic. Now, I grew up hunting and shooting at a very early age, was a state rifle champion even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. After my combat tours were done, after my tours in Iraq were concluded for the Marine Corps, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. Under Mojave Viper, I taught urban warfare and desert warfare, vehicle operations, things like that from Mojave Viper after my combat tours. That was my first real foray into being a professional firearms instructor. That would have been circa 2006. And after that, I went to work for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments, and I worked more specialized assignments. And one of the things I wanted to do was get into instructing and teaching. And I went to the FBI Firearms Academy to become an FBI certified firearms instructor, handgun instructor. So I am FBI certified. I'd have to look at the date on the certificate on that, but I would have to say that was probably circa 2009, 2010. And that really started my journey on the teaching concealed carry, because although I was law enforcement at the time, a sworn peace officer, concealed carry wasn't a big thing then like it is now. Like, not a lot of people were doing it. Not nearly as many as do it today. So I was teaching concealed carry. In fact, the class that I wrote to teach for the FBI Academy was how a police officer should go about selecting his off-duty gun, his concealed carry gun. And this may surprise you, but I've said it many times, cops are not gunfighters per se. There are many cops who are gunfighters, but there are many cops who are not gunfighters. Gunfighting is the gun part of being a police officer is the minority part of that job. And some police officers are not gun people at all. Some police officers don't even like guns, I don't think. You know, they have them because they want a job for whatever reason. They want a good pension. They want, whatever. There's all kinds of police officers, and not to take away from that, but they're not all gunfighters. And not all cops carry off duty. That may surprise you, but they don't. Not all cops carry off duty. So, with that being said, that was kind of part of my job. I taught, with duty guns and everything like that, but I also taught with the off-duty guns and qualified and things like that. I guess that got really into my teaching for concealed carry. I obviously concealed carry before that. I concealed carried as a police officer. And when I was on and off duty, and also carried a backup gun, which you could count, I guess, as concealed carry while on duty, even though I was open carrying as well. I also, a few years after that, went in to get my NRA certificate for NRA handgun instruction, which I do have and still keep current on, and started teaching actual concealed carry classes. I don't know how I would verify this, but I believe I may have been the very first enhanced concealed carry instructor for the state of Idaho, because I remember at the time they wanted an enhanced permit, and as soon as that passed, I went down to the magistrate, the body that was in charge of issuing these advanced concealed carries, and it was so new that they said, you have to do a qualification course for this, and I said, I want to do this is great, what's the qualification course? And they said, well, we don't have one. And I said, hey, what if I write one? Will you guys look at it and approve it? And I did, and they did. And as far as I know, that was the very first one in the state of Idaho, back when that became a thing, enhanced concealed carry, which the idea behind that was in addition to the regular concealed carry, they would have an enhanced concealed carry permit that would let you carry in more states that more states would recognize. So I did that, and I started teaching professionally as an actual professional outside of law enforcement. Like, civilians would come to me and pay for me to teach them how to shoot. And I did that for quite a while, and I really enjoyed that. So that's a little bit of background of me and concealed carry instruction and teaching. Now, a little bit of a look back at how far we've come on concealed carry. Back then, back when I was a cop and first started teaching concealed carry, again, not a lot of people did it. Some people did it, but it wasn't nearly as common. Go back and look at that map on Wikipedia. They give credit where credit is due and see just how far we've come as far as that. But it wasn't real common, even in Idaho. It wasn't real common in California because most people couldn't get a permit. It wasn't nearly as common, I don't think, in Idaho, which is kind of known for being a firearms and hunting state. Back then, and this is not everything that existed, but everything that I recall as being common. Smith & Wesson J-frame, which is a good gun. I still carry one from time to time. It's not by any means my go-to concealed carry gun, but I do often carry a Smith & Wesson J-frame. In fact, that was the first concealed carry gun that is the first handgun period I bought with my own money. Carried an M9 in the Marine Corps. I got out, LAPD issued me the Glock 22, which is, in my opinion, a horrible handgun. They issued that. I later switched to other guns in law enforcement, but we had to buy our own backup and off-duty gun. The one that I selected was a Smith & Wesson J-frame, which I still have. I don't know the model or the designation, but stainless steel Smith & Wesson J-frame 38 special. They did not authorize 357 J-frames. So I had that. Had that for a long time. I still have it. Still a good gun. But those were real common. Also, the Walther PPK. That was kind of a common carry gun at the time. Well-known, proven. Think about that Walther PPK. It's a 380. Think about that and the amount of firepower you get and how big that is. That was considered a small concealed carry gun for the time. Look at that compared to a lot of our modern, whatever they call micro carry guns today. You get that Walther PPK, you're talking 7 to 8 rounds of 380. And look at the size of that gun. You may think that it's a small gun, and I guess, compared to a full-size fighting handgun, a Glock 17 or a Beretta 92, it is. But compared to what we have today, like a Glock 42, which is 380, similar amount of firepower, it's much, much bigger. And just to give you an idea, that was a fairly common carry gun at the time, the Walther PPK. Talking about the subcompact Glocks, and this was one of my carry guns. I had a couple of the subcompact Glocks, but if what was referred to at the time as the baby Glock was the Glock 26 and 27, 9mm and 40 caliber respectively. It was a far cry from when they would come out with the Glock 42, Glock 43. They also did have a very underrated gun, which I carried for a time until I realized how important shot recovery time was and how much recoil it had, the Glock 36, which is a single stack 45 ACP. I think it's kind of one of the forgotten Glocks. If you wanted kind of that uber small, slim, semi-auto, the only real one I can think of that was around was CAR. The CAR PM9s, the CAR 380s. They were around. They were not then and still are not now, I don't think, very common at all. They're not a bad gun. I've owned one of those as well. Honestly, it was an okay gun. I got rid of it, if that tells you anything. But those were around, the cars, but they were not common. Again, because concealed carry wasn't really that common. So they were around, they were known of, but they were not common. And that's really it that I can remember for being common. I guess there were the knockoff Smith & Wesson J-frames, whether that be, like a Rossi or a Taurus revolver, or the Charter arms were around, but something like that, a snub-nosed revolver. There were a couple of different ones of those, but that was really it, if you think about the world of handguns. Now think about today. Fast forward from even the mid-2000s to the 2020s that we're in now. That's crazy to think about. We're getting into the mid-2020s. Think about how far we've come. Think about a Walther PPK compared to a SIG 365. I mean, just think about that. Not only is it more compact, not only does it have more firepower, I would argue it's far more controllable and shootable. If you've ever shot a Walther PPK, they're kind of the worst of both worlds, in my opinion. They're a kind of mid-sized gun that handles and has the recoil of a modern super subcompact. So you're getting more recoil in a bigger gun. And we've come a long way if you look at that. Kind of the first big one to come out that kind of was, if I can use the term game changer, would have been the Smith & Wesson Shield. And that was kind of the first I remember popular. Now, to be fair, CAR was out first. But as I mentioned, CAR's, K-A-H-R, the gun company, they were out, but they were never really popular. When that Smith & Wesson Shield came out, it was kind of a game changer. Because the Smith & Wesson M&P was fairly popular. The Shield came out, and it was kind of a sensation. And it still is. It's still a very popular carry gun, and it's a really good carry gun. When that came on the market, that was kind of a game changer. Here you had this slim, subcompact, and shootable with good ergonomics, polymer, striker-fired, reliable concealed carry gun. And it really was the first kind of its kind. Again, CAR was around, but not real popular. It had a really long, I know it is striker fire, but it has a trigger like a long double action. And there's nothing wrong with a long double action, but it was nowhere near the popularity of the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield. Is a good gun. It still is a good gun. A very good gun. And that kind of, I remember it being the real first popular concealed carry kind of subcompact gun. I think a lot of people, that was their first concealed carry gun if you're talking about the 20 teens, right? That was kind of, again, I can't think of another term, but kind of a game changer in the world of concealed carry. And it kind of held that spot for a while. Up until, it was a while before other companies really jumped on that and started competing with it. And then I guess the next big turning point would have been the SIG 365. Because that gave you not only the sleek, compact, reliable, shootable, micro compact, but it gave it to you with more capacity. So you were getting something close to, a mid-size gun in firepower, but carried like a subcompact. And there's been many of those that have come on of late. The Springfield Hellcat, the Ruger Max 9, things like that. Oh, I should jump back. There was an earlier carry gun before the Shield, really small 380, and that was the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard. I remember that being a thing, now that I think about it. They weren't super popular. They were decently popular among police officers that would carry them maybe in their cummerbund or strapped to their vest or in a pocket. They were fairly common. The Kel-Tecs were, I think, around before. The Kel-Tecs never, I don't remember them ever being super popular. When that design got, I don't know if the patent ran out or they just paid them or whatever, but a very similar design in the Ruger LCP, I think, kind of became more popular than the Kel-Tec. For whatever reason, those were fairly common if you're talking about the super subcompact 380s. But if you've ever shot one of those, you'll appreciate the shootability of the Smith & Wesson Shield that came shortly after that. That really was, here it was in a better caliber. Better is a subjective term, but certainly a more effective caliber in the 9mm, a good defensive caliber, and quite a bit more shootable, I would argue, than either the Bodyguard or the Ruger LCP. So we've covered a little bit of the changes and advancements in that if you go from the J-frame and the Walther PPK to the SIG 365 and similar guns. So now we have this whole kind of concealed carry industry, but again, it wasn't really the case back then. Going from guns to holsters. If you talk about holsters back then, it was likely many people may have just carried it in a pocket without a holster, which was not a great idea, but it was just kind of a thing that was done. Or it was a pocket holster, just a very slim pocket holster was common. If you had a belt holster, Bianchi, the leather holsters, which are good, there's nothing wrong with those, but like a thumb brake leather holster was real common. In fact, when I was in LAPD, we were issued leather thumb brake, like leather polished, that we had to polish, black leather thumb brake holsters. Those were real common in the concealed carry world as well if you were going to carry a gun on your belt, a thumb snap leather holster. There was kind of one other option back then, and that is the Blackhawk. The Blackhawks were around, the Blackhawk Serpa and non-Serpa. Those were certainly around because I remember, because that was kind of one of your only options if you wanted a hard plastic holster. I don't know if they actually are Kydex. That's commonly what they're referred to as. I believe Kydex is a brand name, but you get what I'm talking about. The hard plastic. Those were really the early ones. I only remember Blackhawk. There may have been competitors, but nobody really used many of them. If it was a hard holster, it was probably Blackhawk. I think the Serpas got a bad rap because people use them improperly. That paddle, you're supposed to grab with your index finger straight along the holster, the way it would be when you draw the gun out. You're not supposed to push that button in with your trigger finger, because that'll put your trigger finger into the trigger guard. That's not how you're supposed to use that holster. This is a brief aside, but kind of a pet peeve. You're supposed to grab the gun the way you're going to pull it out of the holster, with your finger straight. And if you do that, that lever will get depressed and your finger will be straight along the frame of the gun if you use the holster properly. I think that holster got a bad rap when people were just using it improperly. But anyway, back in the day, you kind of had the leather thumb brake holsters, or you carried it in a pocket, or you had a Blackhawk. And that was really it. This was before kind of the days of the molded, friction fit Kydex holsters. It really was. I don't remember when exactly they started becoming prevalent or popular for a custom fit for that model Kydex holster. But somewhere in the, I'd say, if memory serves me correctly, the mid-20 teens, they started becoming fairly common. Oh, another thing that was fairly common before that was like the Uncle Mike's one size fits many. I don't know if they're like cotton or polyester or nylon kind of belt holsters. Just as they are now, and I think they were then even, kind of looked down upon. They're not great holsters. There are some concerns with those holsters, but they were around. But if you look at the holsters we have today, there are so many more good options for holsters, and there were even in the mid-20 teens. We have so many great holsters today. You know, back then if you carried on your belt, it was kind of de facto outside the waistband. This whole like inside the waistband, small of the back, appendix, you have so many more options today than you had then. So again, for as much as we think about the people trying to take guns away and things like that, really enjoy and reap the fruits of kind of this golden era of concealed carry that we're in now. So many more options than there was then. Talking about another aspect that's come a long, long way, ammunition. You know, hollow points, really, I don't think were even a common thing for law enforcement until the 90s. You know, and you got to remember, back in the 90s, a lot of law enforcement were still using revolvers. Even in the 2000s, when I was LAPD, there were still LAPD. Some of the OGs there, the old-timers, they were still carrying revolvers. And this was the mid-2000s, the 2000-aughts. And there's nothing wrong with revolvers. I like revolvers, but for a duty sidearm, you know, in an urban metropolitan area, I'm not sure it would be a great choice. But talking about hollow points, think the early generation, the first, I think, and this probably is not the first handgun hollow point, but the first common one, I'm talking common today, I think was the Supervel. And some of the early first generations after the Supervel that I'm aware of that were common in law enforcement, maybe concealed carry, were the original HydroShock, so the Federal HydroShocks, the Winchester Black Talons, which kind of had that whole big fiasco and they kind of went away. And then I remember Federal 9BP and 9BP LE. That Federal 9BP LE, to get off on a small tangent, is still an awesome concealed carry round if your gun can handle it. It is 9mm plus P plus. It is what I used when I was going through the FBI Academy and things like that. It is a great load, super hot. I forget what it was cooking out of that full-size barrel of mine, but it's a hot load, plus P+. If you have like a Smith & Wesson M&P or a good solid gun that can handle the plus P+, supported chamber, all that stuff, it's still a good load. But those were kind of the first gens, and then you started getting into your second gens, which I would argue are quite a bit better. The Federal HSTs, the Winchester Ranger T, which is kind of the Black Talons coming back with a different marketing. Civilian concealed carry started becoming a little bit more common. You started seeing like the Hornady, critical duty, critical defense. Spear gold dots were somewhere in that Gen 1, Gen 2, probably an early Gen 2, the Spear gold dots. Still a great load. And you could argue whether we're in the Gen 2 or the Gen 3 now when you get these like bonded bullets and different kinds of technologies like your Hornady critical duty 135 grain plus P+, or your, Remington black belt golden sabers, things like that. But needless to say, hollow point technology has come a long way. Defensive handgun ammunition has come so far in the past decade, especially 2 decades. Let's not forget how far that technology has come. We've even gotten to the point in .380 where that's a much more viable self-defense option than it was, even for that caliber, even 5 to 10 years ago. Hollow point tech has really trickled down to that .380 to make it way more viable than back in the day when you were likely looking at FMJ or a hollow point that probably wasn't going to expand reliably across the board. If you want to talk about optics on handguns were not a concealed carry thing. They were a USPSA open division, big optic mounted to the frame that you ran in a race holster. There were none of these mounted to the slide. I don't know when the first one of that happened, but they weren't common until very recently. They weren't common, I would say, a decade ago. They may have existed, but we're talking common, and especially for concealed carry. So that optics mounted on a handgun, look at how far that's come in the past even 10 years. Your first real common one, I think, that stood up to beatings was the Trijicon RMR. Then you had like your Delta points, and now there's a whole slew of them. Hollow Sun came on the market, making them reliable and affordable. Just come so far in that world. Another thing I want to touch on, if you listen to the military technology kind of progression episode from GWAT, I forgot to mention flashlights, lighting. That has come so far. To kind of switch topics, in the military, we were issued those big 90-degree giant flashlights. That's what we were issued. You're talking, I forget if they took C or D batteries, and they weren't that bright, and they were huge. And think about that. The first, if you wanted to be super tactical when you got out of training or whatever, you went and got your own mini mag light, and they had the mini mag lights that came with the different color lenses. And not that those are a bad light, but the lumens were minuscule. And bringing that back to concealed carry, if you were carrying a light for concealed carry, it was probably a mini mag light on a belt pouch, and it probably was not very strong. When I was LAPD, this was at the time they were transitioning away from those big mag lights, like the giant ones. And those were pretty bright, but they were huge. And we were getting kind of that first of the next generation of technology. And I think the bulbs were xenon. And I think they were Pelican rechargeable. You had like a recharging station in your police car in the middle, like where your shotgun was, to recharge these lights. And they were quite a bit smaller than the giant mag lights, and I think brighter, but they were very early technology. We did have weapon-mounted handgun lights, the very, very early ones. I think they were Surefire, and if I remember correctly, the Streamlight or Pelican M3. Again, a xenon bulb. Very early tech in this. They worked, but it was kind of like your gun, your sidearm got pregnant. It was huge, and the holsters were huge and bulky to the point where I didn't even want to carry one. To give you any idea of the technology. Now I carry, just for my EDC, for my carry gun, I carry a little small MicroStream, USB rechargeable, super bright, super handy. You got things like that. You got things like the Stiletto, just fantastic. If you think about how far the flashlight and lighting technology has come in the past 2 decades, what amazing advancements. That you could have a USB rechargeable, super bright, super small, handy light like that. So just kind of be circumspect and consider how far the concealed carry world has come in the past couple of decades. And a couple of caveats on this. I'm talking about things that were common, right? So you don't have to point out everything that I missed. I'm talking about things that I remember being common. I know there was the Smith & Wesson early versions of their metal-on-metal guns, like the 59, the 5906s, and their compact and subcompact versions of those guns. They're not bad guns. I just don't ever remember them being very common, especially for concealed carry. They existed, much like the little baby Berettas, the Tomcats, the Bobcats. They existed. I remember seeing them, but they were not common. Things like the old Treasury load and the Nyclad, those may have been around as defensive loads, but again, I don't think they were common. Obviously, the 1911s, as the name suggests, were around a long time before that. But just like today, most people don't carry a full-size fighting handgun for concealed carry. I do. I personally carry a full-size fighting handgun. So obviously things like the Beretta M9 and the 1911 and the SIG 226, they were around, but they weren't common for concealed carry. Just like today, a lot of people don't carry a full-size fighting handgun for concealed carry. I do. I would advise you to try it. They're usually much more shootable gun. It's not so much about the capacity for me, it's about the shootability and the handling and the ability to clear malfunctions quickly. But most people, just like today, decades ago, they didn't carry these big full-size guns for concealed carry. Where open carry was common, they may have been pretty common. And you're talking, maybe Arizona, Idaho, things like that. But for concealed carry, they existed, and maybe some people carried them concealed carry, like a 1911 Commander, but that's still a pretty big gun. I don't remember them being common for concealed carry. For the tactical tip of the day, talked a little bit about FBI. Now, I encourage you to get actual training. A big part of getting training is being able to train yourself. Like, going to a training class is good, but if you just go to a training class, let's say once a year, and you don't train outside of that training class, it's not great. Kind of one of the big points of going to a training course is learning how to train yourself and learning how to train and practice. On that note, one of the things I think you should do as a concealed carrier is shoot qualifications. Now, I am not saying that the FBI qualification is the best qualification out there. I am saying it's probably the most recognized. It might behoove you, if you are a concealed carrier, even if you're not required to have 2 or 3 witnesses next time you and your buddies go to the range. Or, even better with today's technology, video the target and save it. But have 2 or 3 witnesses that will literally sign that target and roll that up and keep that for your records. If you ever get in a use of force and ever have to use your concealed carry gun, it might behoove you, if you have to go to court, to be able to call 2 or 3 witnesses and show as evidence that target and say, hey, I passed the FBI qualification. Now again, is it the best qualification? No, but you're talking about convincing a jury. And most people, American citizens, have heard of the FBI, right? And whether it's right or wrong, they think that the FBI knows how to shoot. Like your average citizen is going to think that the FBI is competent with a firearm. You could argue whether that is or isn't the case, but we're talking about the average juror. They're probably going to think the FBI knows what they're doing when it comes to firearms. So if you can hold up and show, hey, I passed the FBI qualification with this gun to the FBI standard, and I would probably do this every year or every 6 months and say, hey, 3 months ago, before the shooting, I took it upon myself to shoot the FBI qual and pass it to their standards. Guys, it's not that hard of a qual. So if you're a concealed carrier, even if you're not required to, you might want to have that to show it in court. Hopefully you never need it. But even if you don't, it's still training. You're still getting some practice. You're still getting reps and sets in. One of the really good stages I like in that qual, as you may have imagined, I've shot it and had people shoot it many, many times. In fact, when I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, we had our own qual, which was, in my opinion, far harder and far better than the FBI qual. But I still had the guys shoot the FBI qual for that same reason. Because the jurors may or may not know that proprietary qual that we had. And they're not going to know much about guns potentially. But they probably are going to know about the FBI. So I have run this qual many times. And I've administered it many times. I am an FBI firearms instructor. And one of the good stages on that qual, if you don't want to run the whole qual, but you want some good training drills at the range, is with that time limit that they give you, draw, firing 3 rounds right hand only, transitioning and firing 3 hands left hand only. That's a good practical stage. Not all of the stages are that practical, but that's a pretty good practical stage. That's one of the good things about a handgun, is that you can shoot it one-handed. Your other hand might be injured or shot or holding a young child or on the phone or fighting somebody. Who knows what the case might be. That's a good practical stage on that qual. Anyways, that's your tactical tip for the day. Shoot that qual, have it on record, and that one stage in the qual is a good stage to practice. Your tactical verse of the day is going to be a very small part of Psalm 91. I shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor the destruction that lays waste at noonday. 1,000 may fall at my side, 10,000 at my right hand, but it shall not come near me. Psalm 91, a beautiful psalm of protection. Remember that your salvation and your protection does not lie in a firearm, in a 9mm hollow point, in any of that. It lies with God. God is our refuge and strength. With that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.